with the dense jungle that hid the enemy and his movements, provided a screen for ambushes, and in general made an already difficult situation worse. While the human enemy proved to be elusive and often hard to engage, the jungle provided a more obvious target, and one that would yield to herbicide technology. The weapons used against this enemy went by many names: orange, white, blue, green, purple, pink, each for a slightly different target vegetation, but the same result: defoliation. Unfortunately, exposure to the herbicides was not limited strictly to the vegetation in Vietnam. American troops loaded and executed the spraying missions. American troops patrolled defoliated jungle. Some American troops lived in camps where perimeters were defoliated to provide a clear field of fire and reduce the likelihood of surprise enemy attacks. And although similar herbicides had been used for agriculture and forestry in our own country for 15 or 20 years before the Vietnam conflict, the full range of health effects from human exposure are still a matter of scientific and public controversy. And so, the legacy of Vietnam may still be with us, no longer in the headlines of daily body counts or nightly news footage of combat action, but in the names Agent Orange, dioxin, and in the concerns of Vietnam veterans who fear possible ill health as a result of herbicide exposure.
Clearly, a lot of work needs to be done to find a way to really identify...
This program will not get involved with the controversy surrounding the Agent Orange issue. Scientific and medical research will eventually provide those answers. While much is being said on both sides of the issue and new developments are appearing regularly, many questions still remain unanswered. This program will tell you what is known and agreed upon regarding the human effects of herbicide exposure. You will see locations of major herbicide spraying missions and the military units that were active in those areas of Vietnam. Most importantly, you will learn what the Veterans Administration is doing about Agent Orange and how you can help yourself and the VA's effort by cooperating in several VA programs. This will be a low-keyed, reasoned approach to your questions surrounding Agent Orange. It is a very emotional issue, we realize. Veterans are concerned not only with their own health, but with the health of their families. Some veterans fear a time bomb of herbicide effects lurking within their bodies, even though they might not have any symptoms now. There is fear of birth defects, of cancer, of psychological changes. Perhaps the greatest anxiety comes from the fear of the unknown, of what is not known about the effects of herbicide exposure at present. We can suggest few answers, but we ask you to listen to this program and to consider the information presented. And we ask you to take an active role by participating in the Veterans Administration activities related to Agent Orange. American farmers and forestry workers have used herbicides since they were developed in the 1940s. They have been used in large quantities around the world, on the whole, without causing any known immediate hazards. Herbicides are chemicals used to kill unwanted plants, weeds, and other types of vegetation. The commonly used herbicides work generally by dehydrating the plant or by depleting its food supply. Although herbicides were not developed specifically for military use, they were used in Vietnam to achieve several tactical objectives. Primarily, to limit the risk of ambush by depriving the Viet Cong of cover, and to reveal the staging areas of Viet Cong activities. In addition, herbicides were used on crops to deprive the enemy of food. While the majority of herbicides were applied on contested territory, the chemicals were also used to clear some American base and camp perimeters for defense, and along supply routes and communication lines. A breakdown of total herbicide use by objectives would be roughly 90% for forest defoliation, 8% for crop destruction, and the remaining 2% for clearing of base perimeters. Several herbicides were used in Vietnam. They were code-named orange, white, pink, green, purple, blue. These names did not reflect the actual color of the substance, but rather markings on the barrels indicating which herbicide was contained. Of the group, the herbicide orange accounted for 94% of all the herbicides used in Vietnam between 1962 and 1971. Herbicide orange itself is a thick, reddish-brown, foul-smelling 50-50 mixture of two chlorophenoxy herbicides, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. When 2,4,5-T is manufactured, there is an unavoidable byproduct produced, a contaminant known as tetrachlorodibenzodioxin, more commonly called TCDD. This is one of a large group of chemicals known as dioxins. TCDD is one of the most highly toxic chemicals known to man. It is this particular dioxin that is currently the subject of the closest scientific study and debate. It was present in minute amounts in the herbicide orange sprayed in Vietnam and used in this country. We will discuss TCDD more when we begin to consider possible health effects from herbicide exposure. Herbicides were first brought into Vietnam in 1962 and used on a limited basis until 1965. Because of the remarkable effectiveness of this technique, its use expanded from 1965 through 1969. But because of concerns raised about possible health effects, the spraying missions using herbicide orange were stopped in 1970. Herbicides were an effective tactical weapon, used successfully in support of troop operations. Their use probably saved thousands of lives. Herbicides were disseminated in several ways. 90% of all herbicides applied in Vietnam were sprayed by fixed-wing aircraft in the Air Force ranch hand operation. The aircraft used were camouflaged C-123s. It is important to note that only between 8 and 10% of Vietnam's landmass was sprayed, and for the most part in areas where our troops were not located at the time of spraying. Other but lesser used methods of disseminating herbicides were by helicopter and by spray equipment mounted on trucks or boats, or by hand-operated backpack units. It should be remembered, though, that by far the greatest amount of herbicide was sprayed by camouflaged C-123s. In addition to herbicides, there were other chemicals used in Vietnam. For example, insecticides were used to control one of the most dreaded and deadly diseases of the war, malaria. So although you might remember being sprayed or walking through recently sprayed jungle, it doesn't necessarily mean that you came into contact with Agent Orange. It could have been any number of substances. This map indicates areas of major herbicide spraying missions and also the location of the core areas. This is general information and will only give you an indication of the major spray sites. As you can see, the total area sprayed was relatively small. Just because you were in a unit near a heavily sprayed area doesn't mean that you were exposed. Likewise, just because you weren't assigned near a spray zone doesn't rule out the possibility that you might have been exposed. Also, if you were involved in one of these key mission areas, there is a chance that you came into contact with herbicides to some degree. A Shaw Valley, DMZ, Rung Sat, south and southeast of Saigon. These were areas of concentrated, impossible to document or prove. They seem to fall into three main categories: direct contact, actually handling the herbicides or being directly sprayed, entering a recently sprayed area, and exposure through food or water. The veterans at greatest risk of exposure are those 1,200 in the ranch hand operation. This operation involved actually handling the herbicides, loading the drums for the sprayer, flushing the spray system, riding in the cargo bay with the herbicides. Associated with ranch hand operations are ground support personnel, those who might have drained the residue out of the drums or operated the machinery for moving the drums about, or maintenance crews who might have come into contact with herbicide residue while working on the ranch hand aircraft. There are others in other branches of the service who might also have come in direct contact with Agent Orange. Perhaps you loaded herbicides from a drum to a backpack sprayer, or even operated a sprayer yourself. Perhaps you were involved with handling the drums, transporting them from the dock to a holding or loading area. You might have been a door gunner on one of the helicopters that was also used for spraying herbicides. Or you might have actually served on some spraying missions. These are all occupations that are considered to have the highest risk of exposure because of the chance of actual direct contact with the herbicides. We are not suggesting any conclusions about health effects from this exposure. We are only trying to point out the individuals who had the greatest chance of being exposed. Many veterans express concern over whether or not they could have been exposed to Agent Orange by patrolling or walking through treated jungle. You probably would have known if you were in a defoliated area. Brown, dried leaves or no leaves at all. Trees dying from the top down. Plants and foliage generally show maximum effect of herbicides after a period of a few weeks. However, TCDD begins to photodegrade or break down in sunlight within a short time. So if you remember being in a defoliated area like the one described, chances are that the area had been treated a few weeks earlier and that most of the TCDD was in the process of breaking down. In addition, the triple canopy of the jungle intercepted most of the spray. Therefore, the amount of herbicide and TCDD actually reaching the jungle floor was probably small. Again, the risk of contamination most likely decreased with time. It is impossible to estimate how much herbicide may have been in the water in Vietnam, but it is safe to assume that runoff from the jungle or actual riverbank spraying did contaminate some bodies of water to some degree. Herbicides and dioxin tend to settle out in water since they do not dissolve in water and have a higher specific gravity. The particles of herbicides sink to the bottom and once settled in the silt at the bottom tend to persist. Whether this exposed you to Agent Orange is impossible to say. It depends on the water supplies you drank from. In a moment, we are going to talk about the medical effects of herbicide and dioxin exposure, as much as is known, the long and short-term symptoms, what the VA plans to do and is doing, and what you should do if you think that you might have been exposed in Vietnam. We mentioned earlier that TCDD is a very toxic chemical. For this reason, humans cannot be intentionally exposed to TCDD for scientific studies. Researchers then have had to work with animals. From laboratory mice to rhesus monkeys, there have been many animal studies. These have provided some clues to the possible effects on humans. Laboratory studies have shown that TCDD exposure causes cancer, birth defects, weight loss, skin lesions in some animals. The major difficulty with animal studies is that you cannot directly apply the results to humans. For example, these studies often use extremely high doses. Animal studies give some insight into the possible chemical effects in man, but it is well known that different species react differently, and what happens to animals in a laboratory will not necessarily happen to humans. Therefore, much of the information on the effects of these chemicals on humans has had to come from the study of documented cases, such as direct exposure resulting from industrial accidents. While these studies are not as complete as scientists and researchers would like, they have given us some preliminary glimpses into what we might expect, and they provide the only real look into the health effects of human exposure to dioxin. But like the animal studies, it is impossible to draw one-to-one comparisons between these accidents and the types of exposure that were likely to occur in Vietnam. For one thing, concentrations of TCDD in the herbicides used in Vietnam were much less than these accidents. Also, the exposure in Vietnam was probably less direct. Nonetheless, toxic effects occurring shortly after heavy exposure to dioxin are well known and well documented as a result of these industrial studies. We are going to break our description of symptoms into two categories: acute, meaning those symptoms that occur soon after exposure, and chronic, meaning those symptoms that persist over a long period of time. Let's start with the acute symptoms. Again, some of these symptoms are well known and documented from proven human exposure to dioxin in industrial accidents. Physical symptoms include tingling in the hands and feet, aching in the joints and muscles, headaches, nausea, a skin condition chloracne, and general weakness. Other less specific symptoms are weariness, loss of drive, and perceived personality changes. For example, an increased tendency to lose one's temper or irritability. With the exception of chloracne, the symptoms resulting from industrial exposure generally tend to clear up by themselves and in a short period of time. As for chronic or long-term effects, the only condition in humans which has been absolutely linked to TCDD is chloracne. Since chloracne resembles common acne in appearance, it is often difficult to diagnose and may require a special examination by a dermatologist. Chloracne is generally considered to be evidence of exposure to dioxins or related chemicals. Vietnam veterans have experienced many kinds of skin diseases. Most of these problems are quite common and would not prove herbicide orange exposure. It is important not to confuse other skin conditions with chloracne. A physician will have to make that diagnosis. Subtle changes in other body systems have also been suggested as possible long-term effects of dioxin exposure. There are no positive findings as of right now, but research is continuing. From a review of past experiences with herbicides, these are the body systems of concern to researchers at this time: the skin, liver, nervous system, reproductive system. A few reports have suggested the possibility that herbicide or dioxin exposure might cause psychological changes, birth defects, or even cancer. But it is important to remember that right now there is still no definite scientific proof. At this time, the data that are available do not warrant any kind of panic reaction or radical treatments. At the present time, there is no good scientific evidence linking birth defects in the children of Vietnam veterans with herbicide exposure. The time bomb theory that dioxin is stored in your fat cells waiting to be released if and when you lose weight has not been scientifically proven. It is important to keep up your exercise and stay in good physical shape.
After this examination, you'll be able to tell me whether I have Agent Orange or not.
Well, unfortunately, there's no specific test that we have from which we can tell whether your exposure to Agent Orange...
You may feel frustrated and disappointed that you still aren't getting absolute answers to your questions and concerns about Agent Orange. And frankly, the VA shares that disappointment. But no one can give you all the answers when no answers exist. That doesn't mean, however, that the VA is unconcerned or idle. In fact, the VA is actively engaged, not only in providing examination, care, and treatment, but also in research, information gathering, and cooperation and participation with other agencies probing the herbicide issue. In 1978, the VA became increasingly concerned about the effects of herbicide use in Vietnam, and on April 20th, 1979, established the Advisory Committee on the Health-Related Effects of Herbicides. Its purpose was to exchange information about herbicides and the possible health effects of exposure, and to advise the VA on future courses of action, including research. The VA is also currently reviewing all of the world's literature on phenoxy herbicides and the contaminant TCDD. But committees and literature reviews, as important as they are, may not mean much to the veteran who thinks that he or she might have been exposed to Agent Orange and may be suffering from the effects. When you have a medical problem you consider related to herbicide Orange, let the VA examine you. If you have a technical question on Agent Orange, ask advice of your VA medical center or clinic. If you want to file a claim for any health problem, you can get help from the VA. Try not to be alarmed by hearsay. The Agent Orange coordinator, also called environmental physician, at your nearest VA medical center is one of your best sources of information. If you have filed a claim related to Agent Orange or you are examined by the VA, any disability will be researched for a possible link with military service, Agent Orange or otherwise. Results of your examination will be put in your permanent file for possible use in supporting any future claim you file. Data from your examination will be correlated with those of other veterans in search for common problems. If such problems are found, the VA will be able to contact you for follow-up evaluation. In addition to the above, compensation may be available if you have a disability incurred or aggravated by military service. The only requirement is that the disability be confirmed, and it must be related to the time period that you were in military service. There is no requirement to link it to a specific cause, such as Agent Orange.
Okay. What's your last name?
When you come to a VA medical center or outpatient clinic and say that you might have been exposed to Agent Orange, you will be asked to help fill out a questionnaire.
Middle initials.
You will be asked when you were in Vietnam,
Social security
what your
number.
job was, where you were stationed, what your health was like while you were in country,
Service that you served in.
what you've been doing since Vietnam, and similar
How many
questions.
times do you-
The information gathered will be entered into a central computer where it will form the basis of the Agent Orange Registry. More about this registry in just a minute. After you have helped us gather this information, you will be given a complete, thorough physical examination. Not just an examination for what your symptom or complaint is, but a complete physical that will examine all of the body systems. The results of your physical, the laboratory tests you receive, and the information gathered from the questionnaire will all be entered into the Agent Orange Registry that we mentioned earlier. Any veteran who served in Vietnam who wishes to will be examined and will become a part of this registry. The data may be supplemented as needed over the years through a series of follow-up examinations performed by the VA. This registry will allow the VA to keep in contact with you and other Vietnam veterans possibly exposed to Agent Orange. If there are relevant breakthroughs or discoveries regarding either diagnosis or treatment, you will be contacted and promptly advised of the new findings. The VA is also participating in the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology Registry. The purpose of this registry is to collect and review tissue material obtained during surgical procedures and autopsies on Vietnam veterans. These tissues are sent to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, where they are evaluated and reviewed. A report of the findings is then submitted to the VA. The tissues are retained at the Institute so that they may be used for further studies as needed. Some of the studies being considered are the detection of unusual or unique tumors, the search for an unusually high incidence of a tumor from a particular part of the body or occurring at an unusual age, or the discovery of a group of similar cases in a particular military unit. In addition to participating in these data gathering activities, the VA is involved in several educational efforts, not only for veterans but also for VA healthcare personnel. This television program is a part of that effort. Another program provides VA healthcare personnel with the latest scientific and clinical information on Agent Orange. The United States Congress has directed the Veterans Administration to conduct a scientific study of Vietnam veterans who may have been exposed to herbicides. This study, commonly called the VA Epidemiological Study, will try to determine if there are specific herbicide-related health problems within the Vietnam veteran community. Since an important part of this study will be to examine the possible long-term effects of exposure to herbicides, it will be many years before most of the answers are in. However, it is hoped that some preliminary results will be available in the next 2 or 3 years. Congress has also directed the VA to conduct a thorough analysis of the world's scientific literature on possible health effects of herbicides similar to Agent Orange. This will be very helpful to all medical personnel dealing with the Agent Orange problem. The VA is also following several specific research areas, which include the study of toxic effects in laboratory animals and birth defects in mice. The VA will continue to cooperate with other agencies, individuals, and groups who are studying the herbicides. It is you, the Vietnam veteran, who has the biggest stake in the Agent Orange issue. The VA is playing a leading role in gathering all the facts, and we are depending on you for help. If you served in Vietnam and have reason to believe that you have been exposed to herbicides, come to a VA medical center or outpatient clinic and participate in the Agent Orange Registry. If you have physical problems or complaints, the VA wants to know about them and help in any way it can. You can assist the VA by bringing any medical records which you may have, both civilian and military. These records may show that you have sought treatment for ailments in the past that might relate to herbicide or dioxin-related problems. In addition to being helpful to the registry, this information may be helpful in determining your eligibility for treatment and compensation. The controversy surrounding Agent Orange will probably continue for some time yet, and the VA will continue to support you in every way possible, exploring new avenues of research, providing thorough examinations and follow-ups as needed, and disseminating any and all new or important information. If you would like more information about Agent Orange, contact your nearest Veterans Administration Medical Center or regional office. If you have any questions about general benefits or compensation, contact a representative from the Department of Veterans Benefits. In addition, veterans service organizations can provide a wide range of assistance and information. The process is long and frustrating, and sometimes it seems that not much headway is being made. But every day brings us closer to the answers. Do your part. Contribute to the effort. Keep informed. Keep in good health. Keep in touch. If you are still in contact with buddies from Vietnam who are worried about Agent Orange, tell them about the VA's program and ask them to get involved with the registry. The questions are complex and the answers are few. Cooperation and understanding from the VA and you are valuable first steps in coming to terms with Agent Orange. Our greatest hope lies in the resources we share together.